still being at home at the end of the day, going to bed, waking up, doing all that again for however, for the foreseeable, which is my least favourite phrase, because what does that even mean? For the foreseeable. Like, how long is the foreseeable? Hello, and welcome back to episode 5 of Tism Talks, the second ever video episode and the second episode since I made my grand return about 2 weeks ago, I think it was now, or possibly 3 weeks ago. I can't even remember. Feels like it's been a while anyway, and I didn't want to sort of set a routine or a kind of schedule to when these podcast episodes are going to be uploaded, because I don't want to hold myself to any standards and then get disappointed if I don't meet them. So this is just kind of an as and when thing, really, because I'll be honest with you, this podcast sometimes does fall on the back burner because it's not my priority, essentially, in the nicest way possible. I do work full time, and I do have a lot on whilst I am working full time, and I do have a lot on outside of work as well. I wish it didn't, but sometimes it does. And because I still live at home, I still live with my mum and dad, it does mean that recording and finding a suitable space and time to record can be difficult. I do like to wait until I'm home alone because it means that I can, record in the privacy of just me, and I can say whatever I want and I can be as loud as I want. But not to be like screaming or anything, but just to be like I can, talk to myself and nobody's going to think I'm an absolute weirdo. But anyway, welcome back to episode 5. I hope you're well. I hope you're having a good week. I hope you're having a good day, night, whatever time of day, night, whatever it is when you're watching this. And I hope you're well, and I hope you enjoyed the last episode, and thank you for coming back for another one. If you have, or if this is the first episode of Tism Talks that you're ever listening to, welcome. My name's Aine, and thank you so much for joining me on this hopefully wonderful adventure that we can go on together. In today's episode, I wanted to talk a bit about change and why change is quite a scary thing to navigate for not just for autistic people, but for all of us, and how some of the changes that I've been through over the years, over the last few years really, and how I've navigated those, and how I've dealt with those, and maybe how I haven't dealt with those, and maybe looking back how I probably could have dealt with them differently. So yeah, I wanted to dive into today's episode. So I hope you enjoy. Make sure you're following this page if you do, and make sure you give this episode a review, rate the podcast, everything like that. Share it with whoever you'd like, and yeah, let's get into today's episode. So the first thing I will talk about is sort of pre-diagnosis, that before I received my diagnosis of being told I was autistic, I always knew I struggled with change, and I always knew that change was a daunting thing for me and something that I didn't want to happen. And I don't want to make this podcast out to be like, you can only listen to this if you're autistic, because I feel like that's a bit, kind of not inclusive. What's the opposite of inclusive? Not inclusive, anyway. Declusive, is that a word? I don't think so. But I think it's exclusive. No. Well, you know what I'm trying to, what I'm trying to say. Sorry, I'll stop making pop culture references. But you know what I'm trying to say in terms of, I don't want this to be, if you're autistic, you can listen to this, but if you don't, then you won't be able to relate to anything I'm about to say, so don't listen to this. No, it's definitely not that. But I think a lot of my experiences come from a place of, I feel like I've experienced this and it's great to hear that other people have experienced this, etc., etc. But feel free to listen to this. If you are neurotypical, you are fully welcome here. And we welcome all our undiagnosed neurodivergents. We welcome everyone. We welcome everyone. That's all I want to say. Okay. So I feel like I've always struggled with change, but I knew that the way that I reacted to it was probably very different to the way that neurotypicals would react to it, or confront it. The first example I can really think of is, I remember I was about 10 years old at the time. I think I was 9, just about to turn 10, and I changed primary schools. So for context, I went to the same primary school from sort of nursery age, which, if you're not from the UK, is about 3 or 4 years old. And reception 1, 2, 3, and 4, I went to the same school for, and then in year 5 it was decided, well, sort of like, obviously I was involved in the process, that I was going to change primary schools. And I think the reason that the change was so daunting for me is because even though I was involved in the process and I did say, like, yeah, I would like to change schools, I didn't necessarily need to change schools. And I think a lot of the time when a child changes schools, particularly primary schools, particularly at that like early stage in their education and in their life, it's because they need to rather than they want to for various reasons, issues going on in that school, education standards, bullying, etc. And I wasn't experiencing any of those things. The only reason that I did move primary schools is because my parents felt that it was a better standard of education that I was going to be getting at the new primary school, and my sister was already going there and she seemed to be really thriving there. So they thought, why not send Anya there too? So I moved primary schools in September 2013, and I started this new primary school. I was terrified because it was like something I'd never experienced before, and it was a daunting thing because I didn't know anybody, I didn't know where I was going, I had this new uniform on, I was surrounded by all these new people, all these new buildings, all these new places, experiences, sounds, everything like that. And I didn't have a clue how to cope because there's no, I think the things I struggle with is when there's no kind of expectation or there's no kind of rule to go by. And, the autism was obvious from a very young age, but because I'm a girl, no, it wasn't. Like, I was just considered to be shy or antisocial or nervous or anything like that. But I think autism it was never even considered. It was a word I rarely heard, and it was a word that I only heard when it was used in a context for boys. So I I never even considered the fact that other people might not react like this, other children around me might not react like this, or other children might not get so nervous, worked up, anxious, overwhelmed about situations like I did. So I didn't think it was unnatural to feel that way. I thought that was the way that everyone felt, and I thought that was the way that everyone reacted. So I remember turning up for my first day of school in this new school, and luckily I will forever go back to this. Luckily, I wasn't the only one starting the new school on that day. Thankfully, there was about 5 or 6 of us that it was also their first day in the new primary school, so that was positive because it meant that I wasn't starting this brand new experience alone. But knowing that I had a brand new routine to get used to, and I had brand new friends that I had to make, and I had brand new teachers I had to meet, and I had brand new lessons and layouts and plans and routines and times and uniforms and shoes and bags, and it was all so much to cope with. And school was usually something I enjoyed. School was, I think when people say that like your school years were the best years of your life, I wholeheartedly agree with that about primary school. Before I moved schools, I could not have faltered a day that I had in school. I think probably bar 1 or 2 days possibly, but I could not have faltered a day that I had in school because I always loved going to school, and I loved the people that I went to school with, and I loved the teachers, the lessons, everything we did in the school was always a pleasure, and it was always a happy time. Coming to this new school, I was excited in a way, but I was also terrified because I thought, what if this new experience doesn't live up to the experience I already had of going to school, and what if I hate it? Luckily, I didn't hate it. I met some great friends in this new school. You'll be pleased to know. Spoiler alert. I met some great people that were also starting that school on the same day as me, and I met some people that had already been in that school for a few years, and some of them that had been there since the very beginning, since nursery, since reception. I met them all, and they were all so welcoming, and they were all so nice. And I talked to the kids that were starting on the same day as me, and I could just see how nervous we all were, and how much we wanted to fit in, and how much we all wanted to just be liked. And I think that's always a common feeling, is the reason that we're so scared of change is because we want it to go well. And we get ourselves nervous and we get ourselves anxious because we want it to go well. We want it to be a positive thing. We want it to go well more than anything. And when it starts feeling like it's not going to go well, we get even more overwhelmed. So luckily my first day was okay. I did stay in that school until I was 18 and I didn't move despite wanting to various times. But we'll get on to that maybe later in this episode or in a future episode. I didn't move schools the entire time from year 5 until year 13 when I left education, when I left formal education after doing my A-levels. I didn't move schools. Towards the end, I definitely didn't feel as optimistic about going to school, and I didn't feel like I had as many people I could confound in and I could share the experience with due to more reasons than one, but mainly one reason that I won't get into it too much in this episode because I feel like it's something that we probably could dive into in another episode, but I was stuck in rather a controlling, abusive, narcissistic relationship with somebody that I called my best friend for around 7 or 8 years of my life when I was a teenager. I met this person when I was 12 years old, and I didn't, formally break off the relationship with this person until I was 18 years old, just a few weeks after leaving school. And I think it was through the development and the control of that relationship / friendship that I wasn't able to feel comfortable going to school anymore, and I wasn't able to feel like myself or know myself really, and I lost a big part of myself, and that in itself was a change. But I think going back to the first day feeling, the first day jitters, terrifying, and I think that's something that nobody can ever prepare you for. My next experience of change that I have that I wanted to share with you is unfortunately not as a positive one, but I feel like it's something that's important to mention in terms of how we cope with it and how we. God, every time I say how we cope, I think of John Robbins' podcast. It's called How Do You Cope? just a shameless plug in case you want to listen to that. It's very good. Would recommend. When I was 13, I think I was 13. God, I can't remember how old I was for a single experience in this. This is great. In 2017, in September of 2017, I lost my tide, which is the Welsh word for granddad, so my grandfather, my dad's dad, in 2017 at the end of September. And this was my first real experience of grief because I'd never lost somebody that close to me before, and I'd never really experienced what it was like to know and have somebody one day and then they're just gone the next. The only real experiences I'd had of grief before that were we lost my dog Lottie when I was about 7 years old, I think 7 or 8 years old. We lost her. She was 13, I think, when she passed away, so she did live to a pretty good age, but unfortunately she just wasn't well enough anymore, and how dogs get when they're older. So I think that before that was probably my only real experience of grief. But losing my tide, I think obviously losing a person completely impacts you and hits you in a different way to losing a dog. I am love my dogs, would die for my dogs, absolutely adore the bones off them. Tattoo. Why can't I show you a single tattoo? I have a dog paw. I think I showed you that in the last episode. So I think that pet grief is something that's not to be smirked at, not to be, belittled or made out to be not as big a deal as human grief, as people grief. I think it is something that hits us and impacts us in a different way, and something that we can't really properly explain. I lost my tide in 2017 after he died of prostate cancer. He was diagnosed probably about a year and a half prior, so he did live a lot longer than we ever initially expected him to, but it was found that when he was diagnosed with the prostate cancer that he had actually been living with the cancer for about 8 or 9 years previous. It was just never discovered. So it came as a shock to us really that our relationship with him and his life was just going to come to an end after all this time. It felt like a real shock because growing up, my tide was one of the only people who I felt like really understood me and really got me. He was always there to listen, despite him being deaf. He always took an interest in me. He was always asking about me, and he was always, remembering things about me that I'd done during the week or I was going to be doing. Or I played the piano when I was younger, and he'd always be, asking me about the piano. He'd be asking me to play pieces for him, even though he was deaf. I don't know what he could hear, but he was always asking me to play the piano for him. I think he just loved watching me play. He'd always come to piano concerts for me, despite wherever they were. He'd always ask my mum and dad if he could come along, if there was a spare ticket. He'd love to be there. He'd always be so funny. He'd know exactly how to make us laugh, even if he wasn't intending to make us laugh. He'd just always be so witty and so funny about everything. I'm trying to not get emotional while I'm talking about my Tide. But yeah, I think when I was 13 or 12, I genuinely can't remember because it feels like it's been a lifetime. Um, I I didn't exactly know how to process those emotions because I don't think what I was feeling at the time I didn't think was grief. I just thought it was anger. I just thought it was sadness. I didn't necessarily identify within myself that it was grief, because a common thing with autistic people is that we struggle to describe our emotions and we struggle to identify our emotions. There is a word for that. I'll put it on the screen if I can remember, but there is a word for that experience within autistic people, that we struggle to know what our emotions are and to identify them and to describe them to other people, because if they're not the basic emotions of happy, sad, angry, tired, hungry, etc., then we do struggle to articulate those because we don't know what we're feeling ourselves, so it feels impossible to explain it to other people, kind of thing. So yeah, when I lost my tide, I just felt this enormous anger, almost, that why did this happen, and why did it have to happen now? And I was so emotionally avoidant at the time that I even denied feeling grief. I denied that was the thing that I was upset about, and that was the thing that was getting me down, and that was the thing that was making me not feel like myself. um and then I remember at his funeral, which was the 3rd of October 2017, which is the day before my birthday, so that was a great birthday present. I was supposed to read a extract, a little piece that I'd written to read out at his funeral. Um, and I was fine the whole way there. I was pretty much just numb to everything in the car on the way there. And then as soon as the music kicked in, as we walked into the church, I just started bawling. I just couldn't do it anymore, and I just said to myself, no, I can't do this, and I wanted to run out of the church and never come back. And I think sitting in the front row at a funeral just makes it so much worse, because you know that nobody else in there is feeling grief quite like you are. And as the music went on and the service went on, and then it got to the bit where I was supposed to read my piece I'd written, I just turned to my mum and dad and I just said, I can't do it. I can't do it. And my sister had to read the piece for me, which in a sense I regret, because I think it would have been better coming from me because I wrote it, and out of the two of us I'd always had a better, closer relationship with my Tide. So it sort of felt like it wasn't fair for her to read it. But I I just couldn't bring myself to. I was just not strong enough to get up there and to do that, because I I was just still navigating this massive change that was happening to me, and it was such a horrible change, probably the worst change I've ever gone through in my entire life. The next change that I really navigated was a change in my circumstances, and a change to my life, really. Probably not a change to anyone else's life. I mean, maybe a couple of people around me, but mainly a change to my life, and that was leaving university. And that was something that I tried very hard to pursue, because I think when you have an idea in your head of where your life's going or where something's going or what you're going to be doing with the rest of your life or the next few years or anything like that, 5-year plan, everything like that, to suddenly change that and to suddenly say, actually, no, I don't feel like doing this anymore, it's terrifying to confront. And I think when I realised that I didn't want to be in university anymore, I sort of thought to myself, well, if I don't want to be in university anymore, then what do I want to be doing? And finding the answer to that question was scary, daunting in itself, because I didn't know. I didn't know. I didn't have a plan for myself outside of university. I think it's drummed into us from such a young age that you go to school, you get good grades, you go to sixth form, college, whatever, you go to do your further exams, anything like that, you get good grades, and then you go to university, you get a degree from university, and then that's how you get a job. And that was the sort of attitude that was drummed into me, and a lot of people my age, and probably a lot of people older than me, people younger than me, it will still be drummed into them, is the education system, and that's how it works, and that's the only way that you can be successful in life. It's not. It's not. And it always takes me back to the annual tweet that Jeremy Clarkson makes every year on GCSE results day. Is it A-level results day? No, it's A-level results day. That he got 2 C's and a U, and then followed by random flex. And he finds a new one every year. And it's like, I got 2 C's and a U in my A-levels, and I'm choosing which Lamborghini or whatever to drive today. It just makes me chuckle every single year. And I think it just perfectly illustrates the point, really, that you don't need grades and you don't need academic success in order to get far in life or to do well. I was always probably quite well hell-bent on doing well in school, but university, that was where I struggled to know whether that was what I wanted to do. But lo and behold, I decided after I've sat my A-levels, I want to go to university, and I chose my course, and I chose my accommodation, I chose everything like that, I chose my university, and I was all ready and I was set to go. And in September of 2022, I left the job that I was working at the time, and I moved to university to start my course in education studies in Spanish. I know. Education studies in Spanish. It was a combined degree, so it was part education and it was part Spanish. And can you guess what job I wanted to have after I'd finished my degree in education studies in Spanish? Oh, you guessed it. Spanish teacher. The reason I always wanted to be a Spanish teacher is because my Spanish teacher, from the age of, I think it was the first year of GCSEs actually, and we were very nervous because we'd had Spanish lessons before, but they were only for an hour a week because our school was so small that our Spanish teacher was also our French teacher, and she was also some people's Welsh teacher. Voluntary aided school for you. So she left after year 9, and I'd already chosen Spanish as a GCSE at that point, so I thought, oh no, who am I going to be spending my GCSEs with, and possibly my A-levels if I want to do Spanish at A-level too. And then an angel in the form of my new Spanish teacher came along, and she just changed my life. She was incredible. Cambiado mi vida. I think that's right. If that's not right, then what was the point? She changed my life. She was incredible. She was so supportive, and she was so honest, and she was so encouraging and motivated, and just made me feel like I could conquer the world with mi español. So I'll stop speaking in Spanish now. She was just incredible, and I loved every second that I spent with her, and I think about her all the time. And I did do my A-level Spanish with her as well, and I couldn't have asked for a better teacher because she just made it so enjoyable. And I think that's the reason that I still carry on to have a passion for Spanish to this day, is because I think of her and I think of the way that she taught Spanish. And I thought, if I can even be half the teacher that she was, then I'll be on the right track in life. So I knew I wanted to be a Spanish teacher. I left to go to do my degree in education studies in Spanish. About 2 weeks in, I remember thinking, this is not what I want. And it sort of felt a bit like, come on, like, give it a chance. It's only been a couple of weeks, but I knew that I wasn't happy. Don't get me wrong, I was happy in every other aspect of university. I was happy with the people I was surrounded with, and I had my little apartment, I had my own little kitchen, my little bathroom, I had a little bedroom. It was cool, I had a good view, I could see them playing football in the evenings, it was great. It wasn't the content, it was the way it was being taught, and it was a massive change. Again, cementing the point of this episode. It was the way that I didn't feel like it flowed on naturally from the way that I was taught and the way that I learned in school. And I just felt so confused. constantly and like, this isn't what I want to be doing, you know, I have a whole life to live. Why am I spending the next 4 years of it studying or whatever? And the interesting thing when you do a languages degree, I think most languages degrees anyway, is you actually get the opportunity to spend a year abroad. And I remember thinking, can we just skip to third year already so I can live in Spain for a year? Because that was the only reason that I really wanted to, you know, press forward with doing a languages degree. As much as I love learning languages and I love learning about, you know, the histology and the grammar and everything like that, the history of language and, you know, structures and everything like that, and the different countries and the different persuasions and everything like that. It was fascinating. But I remember thinking, you know, can I put this into practice? Could I just go and live in Spain for a year already? Unfortunately, I didn't make it that far. And after about 3 months in university, I decided to withdraw from my course because I just wasn't happy there and I wasn't thriving. I felt mentally probably the lowest I'd been, and I knew that this wasn't going to be turning around anytime soon, and it probably wasn't going to change, and it was only going to get worse before it got better. So I didn't want to press on with it, if that makes sense. And you know, obviously university is such an expensive experience as well that it felt like if I'm just wasting money on doing something I'm not happy with, then what's the point? So I withdrew from university. I don't like to say dropped out because I think that gives you the connotation that I like failed at it or like it was, you know, I got kicked out or something like that. I like to say withdrew or I left because I like to think that I left on my own terms and I left on my own accord. So I don't think it was necessarily a thing of, you know, I don't want to be here anymore. It was just, I can't be here anymore. Because if I carry on and if I keep doing this, then I'm gonna be a horrible person to be around. Because I'm not gonna be happy. And I'm gonna hate this and I'm gonna hate my life. And I don't know about you, but I don't want to hate my life. It's not a great feeling to have, is it? So after leaving university in December of 2022, I navigated again another change, and that was coming back into the world of work. Since I've turned 18, I've navigated a lot of different jobs in a lot of different environments, but I think the scariest one was coming back from that university environment and sort of immersing myself into the world of work again, because it felt like I'd tried something and it hadn't worked and I'd had to come back to the original thing, and it just felt really weird and really scary and really daunting, because I was sort of like half expecting people to see that you know, why is there a gap on your CV? Oh, because I went to university for 3 months. Why were you only there for 3 months? It sort of felt like it felt a bit of a embarrassing thing to explain. Luckily, it didn't come up too much, but when I explained to people why, they seemed to understand. So, and I think it was always in the sort of corner of my mind of, am I struggling with this because I'm autistic? And at that point, I'd made the referral to go forward for an assessment, but I hadn't heard anything back. So I didn't like to say to people, you know, I'm undiagnosed autistic or I'm self-diagnosed autistic, because it sort of felt a bit like it wasn't a proper thing and I didn't, you know, have a right or have a place to be able to say that because I wasn't officially diagnosed. So I didn't really mention it to people, but I remember mentioning it to my team lead at the time in the next job I got, which was only about a couple of weeks after I left university really, which I was very thankful to get a job through the agency that I was previously working for a different department but in the same company I was working for in the summer of 2022. And I got a job working in IT. And I was very happy there because I felt like I'd found my people. I felt like I'd found, you know, sort of mutual interest in people that shared my passion for technology, and it was a really interesting group of people to be around, and it was a really positive experience. I stayed in that job in IT for about a year, I believe it was. It was from December to December, so 2022 to 2023, until my contract came to an end in December 2023. I was very happy to have had that experience and to be able to, you know, say I've done that and I've met these people. And I do still try and keep in touch with those people when I can. So I remember saying to my team lead a few months in, you know, why I was struggling with some of the changes that were being thrown upon us as we came to the end of our training. And I just sort of said to, like, try to mention to her that I was going through the process of getting diagnosed with autism, and I was pretty sure I was autistic, and she completely understood. And I think it was that level of understanding and that level of sort of I see you and I hear you that really, really helped me, and sort of motivated me to keep going and to know that there are people out there that would understand me and that would get me and that would, they wouldn't judge me and they would understood the way that I worked. And it was a good feeling to have that and to know that there are people out there that do get you and won't judge you for just being yourself, really. And then about a year later, I think it was, or about 6 months later anyway, I unfortunately lost my job, lost the job that I went into after I left IT, which I see as a blessing in disguise, to be honest, because I'll be honest with you, I didn't like the job that I was in, it didn't feel like the right sector for me. But losing a job and being unemployed felt terrifying. Fortunately, I was in some pretty good circumstances when I lost my job. I was, still living at home, so it's not like I had any bills or responsibilities or anything like that to pay. I didn't have any dependents because, like I say, still live at home, don't have a family of my own or anything like that. So I was in pretty good circumstances in terms of that. But I think the main thing for me was the change in routine and how I was going to navigate that and how I was going to feel about going from waking up, going to work, coming home, going to bed, waking up, going to work, etc., etc. Going from that to just waking up, having nothing to do, trying to make a plan of what the hell can I do today, you know, probably still being at home at the end of the day, going to bed, waking up, doing all that again for however, for the foreseeable, which is my least favourite phrase because what does that even mean? For the foreseeable. Like, how long is the foreseeable? It's like when people say imminently, like, what does that mean? How long is imminently? Who knows? A day, a week, a month, a year, 2 years, 6 years, 5,000 years? Like, what does imminently mean? I hated not having a routine and I hated life being so unpredictable. And that is probably, again, the most recent but probably the biggest change that I'd navigated that felt horrible again, because I didn't know how to cope with it and I didn't know when it was going to end was the scary part. I didn't know how long I was going to be stuck like this. So I did what any reasonable unemployed person would do. I applied for about 5 jobs every day because I was desperate. I was not desperate to have a job, but desperate to have some routine and desperate to have a purpose to my life and a reason to wake up in the morning. If in all honesty, just a reason to keep me going and to give me a little bit of let's go and do that. And I didn't mind what it was. I wanted something that was going to give me purpose, obviously, but I didn't mind what it was. I just wanted a reason to wake up in the morning and know I was useful for something. The amount of like pointless trips that I did when I was unemployed. It's a good job I couldn't drive at that point because if I could have drove when I was unemployed, I would have just been here, there, and everywhere. But so that's what I did. I focused on learning to drive. I did a lot of driving lessons, and I pretty much had any availability because I wasn't working, so I could be free any hour of the day, any hour of the day, any day of the week, any week of the month. And I focused on driving. I did a lot of driving lessons in that time. I did some like intense driving lessons as well, so that was very useful. I did a lot of pointless train trips to various cities. I did Manchester, Liverpool, Birmingham, you name it, I was there. I did a lot of cinema trips. I watched a lot of films. I set a challenge for myself to watch every film that Miles Teller was in, which he's one of my favourite actors. And I did manage to do that. I think it was about 20 or 30 films in the end, which I'm not a massive film guy, so that felt like a huge achievement to me. Just massively bored. I think it's what anyone who has ever been unemployed will tell you. I was just so bored and looking for a reason to keep going. If I could take one thing away from that, it would be appreciate the free time while you have it. Appreciate the period of life where you've got no purpose. Because it might feel like it's awful in the moment, but you look back on it when you're employed and when you're stressed and when you've got so much responsibility and so much to do, and you just think, oh, to wake up and to have no plans. I went to a lot of concerts during that time, which I was able to really like spend time and energy on because I didn't have anything else to think about. I went to go and see Taylor Swift, we saw Troye Sivan, we saw Nothing But Thieves, we saw Niall Horan. It was great. I loved it. Summer of 2024. Take me back, honestly. I mean, me at the time probably wouldn't have said that, but yeah, take me back. Anytime my friends be like, "Do you want to do?" I'd be like, "Yeah, see you there. I'm on my way." Like, I'm already packed. I'm on my way. Recently, I think the two biggest changes I've had to navigate in the past year or so, I had two experiences of grief quite close together. In September of 2025, I lost my uncle Paul after a short battle he had with lung cancer. He passed away on the 9th of September last year, 2025. And his funeral was at the 23rd of September 2025. And I think that was a massive change for me, because since my Tide passed away in 2017, Paul came into our lives like he never had before, really. Paul was my dad's brother, for context, my uncle Paul on my dad's side. And he just came into our life and, caused a lot of anguish, let's say, a lot of trouble at times, but he always knew exactly how to make us laugh, and he always knew exactly how to put a smile on our faces and to make bad situations seem not so bad. He was so funny, and he was so full of life, and he was so full of confidence, and made every situation seem a little bit less grey, put some colour in those grey clouds, and it was a massive change again, and it was a really, really horrible one to navigate, losing him. And I think every time I hear a Simple Minds song now, I'm gonna think about him. We were in, as his immediate family, we were in charge of choosing the music for his funeral. And my dad had a big hand in it, obviously, as his brother. And he chose It's My Life. Link them in the description if you want to listen to them. But he chose It's My Life for the music as we were walking up to the grave, because he had a graveside funeral. He wasn't really like religious or anything, so we didn't choose like a church service or anything, so we just had a graveside funeral. And as the coffin was being lowered into the ground, we did Don't You Forget About Me by Simple Minds. And as my dad, after my dad had read the speech, we had sort of like a few moments just of kind of reflection thing. And we played an instrumental version of You'll Never Walk Alone, the Liverpool anthem, which I think that just made things so much more emotional than they already were, really, because Paul was a lifelong Liverpool supporter. He'd always want to talk about the game that was happening, or any results, or any fixtures that were coming up. He'd always want to talk to my dad about that. It was definitely a difficult one, and it was definitely a change that I didn't feel like I was ready to sort of properly navigate, but it's a process, and it's something that I think I dealt with a lot better than I did when I lost my Tide. And then about a couple of months after we lost Paul, I lost my dog Poppy. And I think when I speak about grief, this is probably the one that I mean, obviously you always know that a dog's death is coming, because unfortunately they can't live forever. But it was a change, and it was a death that I never wanted to happen, because we'd had Poppy since I was 6 years old. And I remember the day that we got her, and I remember so many days with her, because she was my best friend, and she felt like my soul dog. I always felt incredibly close to her. I felt like I didn't have to build a relationship with her, or I didn't have to introduce myself or anything like that. She just got me, and I just got her. And she was such a good girl. I'm trying to not get emotional when I speak about this. She made me so unbelievably happy. And there'd be periods in my life where I'd just come home and I wouldn't feel like talking to absolutely anybody, but I knew that I'd always be able to talk to her, and she'd always be there for a cuddle when I needed her. And she never, she was never horrible. She would never be horrible to anyone. she'd always be friendly with everybody. You know, she might have barked in your face for a little bit, but that was only her way of saying hello. And she was always so kind and so giving and so patient. And even when we brought Ellie, who's my other dog, she's 8 now, so Poppy was about 6, I think, when we brought Ellie home. She was so welcoming to her, even though we were bringing this new dog into her life, and we were sort of expecting her to instantly get on with Ellie and, you know, take her in. And she did, perfectly. And she never complained, and she never made it, you know, obvious that she didn't want this new dog or anything like that. She just was always so welcoming and so kind to everybody. Poppy was diagnosed with canine dementia, which is something that can affect dogs as they get older, sort of similar to human dementia in the way that it presents itself, when she was about 13. And that was a massive change, again, because it meant that I had to watch this dog that I'd grown up with and known to behave and to think and to do a certain way change into a dog that we didn't recognise, really. And I don't think she recognised herself, and it was heartbreaking to watch at times, because she didn't really know where she was, and she couldn't really see what was in front of her, and she couldn't hear things around her, and it just felt cruel in the end, really, to keep her going when there was, you know, there was no, it just felt at points like there was no happiness for her, really, and she just wasn't the same dog that she was anymore. So she passed away in November of last year. So it's been about 7 or 8 months now since we lost Poppy, and I still think about her every day, and I don't think I'm ever going to stop thinking about her, especially because she'd been in my life for such a long time and she'd had such an impact on me, that I don't think it's ever going to be an easy one to move on from or to forget about. And I certainly don't want to forget about her, because she just made me so happy, and she always knew exactly what to do to cheer me up. So yeah, I think that's probably the biggest experience of change that I've had recently, anyway, is losing Poppy and losing a member of our family, our very close family, that lived in this house with us and grew up in this house with me and was always by my side. I think the reason that change can feel so scary as an autistic person is because, like I had mentioned previously, it's because we want it to go right, and we feel like we need control in a lot of these situations. And sometimes when things change, it feels like we're losing control, and it feels like we're not navigating the situation properly anymore. Because, for example, when there's something that I can't control, it makes me feel like I'm not a part of it anymore. And I wouldn't see myself as a control freak particularly, or a controlling person, but I sort of look at myself in these situations where things are changing, and I think, actually, am I a controlling person? Because I didn't think I was, but, you know, this is saying otherwise. I think I am getting better at it, and I'm sort of telling myself, you know, things have changed before, and they've been alright, you know, this has happened before, or a similar situation has happened before, and it's actually been okay. And some changes, even though they seem scary and they seem daunting at first, can actually lead to some brilliant outcomes. For example, one of my favourite bands that are not together anymore, but I still call them one of my favourite bands, even though they haven't been together for nearly 3 years now. One of my favourite bands was CNCO. And they announced that they were splitting up in 2022 and performed their last show together at the end of 2023. And them splitting up felt like losing a part of my identity, I'll be so honest, because it felt like losing such a huge and pivotal part of me and my interests and my favourites and things that I liked, and something I could talk about and something I knew a lot about. So them stopping making music and them stopping being a band, it felt awful, really. And I think that was probably something that contributed to a lot of my low moods, as stupid as it sounds. But if your favourite band's never split up, then you just won't know, will you? But I think, looking back, if they hadn't split up, some of the solo projects that we've had out of the guys since they've split up and they've gone in their own respective careers and they've gone on their own paths, some of the solo projects have been incredible. Eric, for example, Eric Bryan, He has gone on to most recently, produce an album called Death Tiempo. Incredible, absolutely incredible, some of the music that he's producing. He released his debut EP, which is called BTW Lo Intente, last year. Absolutely love it. If you couldn't tell, I like Spanish music. Christopher Velez, who is my favourite, got early 2 episodes back to mention him again. Wow, that must be a record. He has done some interesting things with his solo career, let's say, but he's done some incredible collabs as well. Him and Eric produced a song called Bajo Cero, which came out earlier this year. If the band never split up, that would have never happened. And I think sometimes it can feel like the cons outweigh the pros, and it feels like, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. But I think of a quote from the last episode of The Big Bang Theory all the time, in which Penny says to Sheldon, I guess the only thing that stays the same is that things are always changing. And that sticks with me a lot, because I think it's so true that as much as we deny change and as much as we don't want it to happen, it's happening around us all the time. And even in coming back to this podcast, that was a change, because picking up the microphone for the first time in nearly 2 years, that was a massive change for me, and it sort of felt like, oh, can I do this? I haven't done this for a while. Can I do this again? That felt like a massive change within itself. So I think sometimes it's important to embrace change, as daunting as it can be. So I think I'll leave it there for today's episode without rolling on for too long, without boring you to tears about how much change I've been through, and arguably how much change we've all been through, really, because I think it affects us all, even if we don't realise it in the moment. So, anyway, I hope you enjoyed listening to today's episode of Tism Talks. If you did, make sure you are following this page and you hit that bell icon so you get a notification every single time I post a brand new episode. Like I say at the beginning, this podcast isn't going to be sort of a regular, I'm doing this one week, it's going to come out next week, etc., etc. I want it to kind of be, as and when I feel like I'm uploading an episode. So sorry if that disappoints you. Sorry if you wanted a weekly upload, but, uh, I'll try my best. I'm trying my best, guys. It's okay. But yeah, hopefully I will see you very soon for another episode. And yeah, keep in touch. Watch the roads. See you soon. Bye.